Alrighty, what's cracking everybody? So today, as you can see from the title, I'll be talking about logic. This video will be sort of a brief overview or introduction to it. Very, very brief, like this is a real beginner's sort of friendly video for it. But this was a video that I promised in my critical thinking video, and that's been nearly a year ago now, so sorry for anyone that's been waiting for it. But I promised I would do it, and so here I am doing it. I feel I need to mention, this here is the book that I'm sort of drawing a lot of this from. It's a great introduction book by Nicholas J.J. Smith. It was even kind of recommended in my logic course that I did. The teacher used a different book, but I had a one-on-one with him and I talked about how I had this book and he said this one's also great, and he even met Nicholas J.J. Smith, which is pretty cool. So yeah, if you just want to like more in depth after watching this video, like to see, to study more about logic, I recommend this book. It's actually really great. But alrighty, let's dive straight in. So here we go. Here's my little introduction. Studying philosophy or computer science, you need to learn logic. I'm studying philosophy, but I've written computer science because you also do study logic if you're doing computer science. So that's why that's in the title. Alrighty, so what is logic? So logic is often described as the study of reasoning or the systematic study of truth. It concerns itself with propositions or sentences that are true or false. Logic can be applied to human reasoning, computer science, and even plays a central role in the theoretical foundations of mathematics. Now, I won't be diving into that part of it because I don't really understand that fully myself, but I just thought I'd mention it because it was mentioned in the book that I was talking about. Alrighty, so this is, I kind of touched on this on my critical thinking video, but if you didn't watch that, propositions, what are they? They are sentences that can be true or false. So here's an example. You are watching this video. That's a proposition because you would say it's either true or false. In this case, if you're watching this video, it's true. Can I borrow your car is not a proposition because it wouldn't make sense to say true or false in response to that question. Propositions can be organized into arguments, which spurs the next question. What are arguments? All right, arguments are reasons for accepting a claim. So arguments are formally structured as a set of premises and a conclusion. So the premises give reasons for accepting the conclusion. And there are commonly three types of arguments. There are deductive, inductive, and abductive. Now, logic mostly deals with deductive logic, but I just thought I would talk about the other ones as well. But first, deductive arguments. So, deductive arguments' premises support the conclusion in the strongest way. If its premises are true, its conclusion must also be true. The must there is really important because you'll see here. I've got an example here. Example, premise 1, all men are mortal. Premise 2, Socrates is a man. Conclusion, Socrates is mortal. So this is why I emphasize must. If you accept premise 1 and 2, you must accept the conclusion. It deductively follows from the two premises. That's what that word means. Deductive means you basically, as long as the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. All right, inductive arguments. These are arguments that make inferences from the observed to the unobserved. So if its premises are true, then it provides a good reason to accept a conclusion. Notice it's not as strong as deductive. Like you saw in the deductive one, you have to accept the conclusion if you accept the premises. In this one, it's a bit debatable, inductive arguments. You can absolutely push back on some of these things. But I've chosen a sort of simplified example here. So premise 1, the sun has risen every day in recorded history. Premise 2, today is a day. Conclusion, the sun will rise today. So not many people would debate this, but I mean, in philosophy, everything is up for debate. So there are people that would absolutely debate that this, because the sun has risen every day in recorded history, therefore it'll rise tomorrow. I won't really get too much into that. That's more philosophy stuff. But you understand now an inductive argument. You could absolutely, it's still a very strong sort of argument. You would take this and show anyone, and they would be like, yeah, I accept that. Yeah, the sun will rise, today. But some philosophers will push back on it. So it's not as rock solid as a deductive argument. All right, abductive arguments. So abductive arguments draw a conclusion from the phenomena that best describes the premises. So if the premises are true, they provide a good reason to accept the conclusion. So you can kind of see I've gone from deductive, which is pretty much guarantees certainty, to inductive, which is pretty generally accepted, to now abductive, which is kind of the weakest of the three. But I like to think of it as this is what detectives would use if they're trying to if they come to a crime scene or something like that. But I've used a different example here. So here we go. Premise 1, the grass is wet this morning. So possible explanation 1 is that it rained overnight. Possible explanation 2 is that the sprinkler was left on. Conclusion, it rained overnight. So in this case, they've I don't know, this hypothetical example, they've figured out that they don't have a sprinkler maybe. So of course the possible explanation 1 makes the most sense. If they did have a sprinkler, maybe it's in winter. So they're like, well, the sprinkler definitely wouldn't be on. But if it was in summer, and they have their sprinklers on, you can absolutely see how, possible explanation 1 and 2, it could be either one of them. But just, for this one, just imagine that it's someone who doesn't even have a sprinkler. So their possible explanation 1 is the most likely conclusion. So you can see what I mean. Like, detectives would use this sort of stuff. They'd say, come to a crime scene and see, there's evidence of a struggle. There's gunshot, holes in the walls or something like that. Someone's been shot and murdered. It's pretty reasonable to accept that. So yeah, abductive arguments are sort of what detectives would use. But anyway, all right, on to validity. All right, so what is validity? Validity, when we're talking about arguments, is more so talking about the structure. It's talking about, so I've written here, if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. So we're going back to deductive arguments. We're going to stay with deductive arguments because that's what logic deals with. And you can see how I've got an example here, but what have I written here? The premises and conclusion of a valid argument may not actually be true, but validity goes towards structure. Yeah, okay, good. I'm glad I wrote that. So this is an example that I've got to sort of highlight how validity isn't talking about the truth of the actual premises. It's more so talking about the structure. So example here is premise 1, all dogs are fairies. Premise 2, Fido is a dog. Conclusion, Fido is a fairy. Now, obviously fairies don't exist, but you can see how if someone accepts premise 1 and they accept premise 2, they must accept the conclusion. So it's not talking about what we call soundness. Soundness goes to the actual truth of the matter. It's just talking about the structure. If all dogs are fairies and Fido is a dog, then it naturally follows from the two premises that Fido is a fairy. So that's validity, but validity is kind of useless unless you have soundness, which I'll talk about now. So soundness is when an argument is valid and has true premises and a conclusion. So kind of remember it like this. Yeah, soundness equals validity plus truth. So here's the example I've got now. I've changed the Fido one to premise 1, all dogs are mammals. Premise 2, Fido is a dog. Conclusion, Fido is a mammal. So you can see here, there's no fairies in this example. All dogs actually are mammals. That's true. Okay, just pretend Fido exists. Fido is a dog. That's true. And conclusion, Fido is a mammal. It follows from the premises that Fido is a mammal because all dogs are mammals and Fido is a dog. So you can kind of see how now this is sort of the basics of deductive logic. It is, you have to have validity when you're structuring an argument, and if you want people to accept the argument, it also has to be true. It has to be sound. So I mean, you could, you know, you're not going to convince many people that Fido is a fairy because fairies don't exist, but you can show this to anyone on the planet really, and they will agree with the conclusion because we know that dogs are mammals, and, you know, in this hypothetical case, Fido is a dog, so it follows that Fido is a mammal. Alrighty, now we're getting into the sort of, if you've ever seen logic, like written out, you'll probably see these kinds of weird symbols, almost like we're doing mathematics. So I wanted to start talking about that. So when doing logic, you use special notation to represent the form of an argument. So its sentences are built from these things, a set of lowercase symbols called atomic sentences. So P, Qs, and Rs. I don't really know why they start at P. Like they actually all start like, you know, they'll use like P, Q, R, S, T. They don't start at A or B. I don't know why, but it's just something that they do. Then you have a set of connective symbols. So that's what those 5 symbols there are. And you'll also have a pair of bracket symbols for some logical notation. I've got here just a sort of table just so you can see. Don't worry too much if you don't understand this. It'll make a bit more sense. If you go back to this part of the video after you've finished the video, this will make a bit more sense. But I just wanted to sort of put this here. So you've got the 5 connectives: and, or, not, if then, and if and only if. And those are the symbols to connect to them. But what better way to learn than with an example? So here we go. Let's translate an argument into propositional logic. Premise 1. If Matt reads manga, then he is handsome. Premise 2. Matt does read manga. See? Conclusion. Matt is handsome. So I've translated this into propositional logic. And you can see how it's P, that little dash symbol Q. That stands for if P, then Q. And then the next line is P, therefore Q. So if Matt reads manga, then he is handsome. That's if P, then Q. Premise 2 is Matt does read manga, so P. And then the conclusion, Matt is handsome, Q. You can kind of see how now you're translating propositions or arguments into logical notation. Here we go. Just one more example, just to sort of hopefully get it to set in. Premise 1, either the butler committed the murder or the maid committed the murder. Premise 2, the butler didn't commit the murder. Conclusion, the maid committed the murder. So I've translated this as P or Q, because the little V symbol stands for or. So P or Q, and then the next line is not P, that's the butler didn't commit the murder, or it's not true that the butler committed the murder. And conclusion, Q, which is that the maid committed the murder. So P stands for the butler committed the murder, Q stands for the maid committed the murder. So you would write P or Q, either one of them did it. Then we've ruled out that the butler committed the murder. So the butler did not commit the murder. So we'd write not P. Therefore, it follows Q. The maid committed the murder. If it's either P or Q and we've eliminated P, then Q has to be true. So the maid's committed the murder. So there we go. That's a sort of brief overview of logic. You can kind of see now, well, hopefully, you know, let me know if I didn't do a good job in this video, but hopefully you have a bit of a grasp on what it is now and how it's used in philosophy and computer science. Mostly I'm coming from a philosophy background, but yeah, you can kind of understand now logical notation, how it works, deductive, inductive, and abductive arguments, what arguments are, premises, conclusions, validity, soundness. I hope you have a sort of general overview now of what logic is. Here you go. Congratulations. You know what logic is. I don't know why I put this as the last line, but whatever. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and yeah, I hope you have a good one.